Well, good afternoon. As Kate mentioned, my name is Jeff, and I've been in healthcare staffing for over 20 years. So currently, as she mentioned, I serve as the vice president for our locum tenens division. But prior to that, spent about 17 years in the permanent placement side of the business. Was a recruiter for many of those years, recruited physicians, helped clients find doctors, helped doctors and healthcare professionals find new opportunities, and worked my way into various leadership positions. And around 2000, we had an acquisition as an organization. And Comp Health is part of the CHG family of companies. But we had an acquisition in around 2000. And I was asked to oversee the acquisition for the company. And one of the things we found is this particular organization had about an 80% turnover rate. We were hiring them as fast as we could. Our leaders were spending all their time hiring, interviewing, training, and parting ways with the staff. And we weren't spending nearly enough time doing the job that our customers were expecting us to do, which was to assist them in their recruitment efforts, help physicians and healthcare practitioners find new jobs, and help facilities find permanent physicians. So one of the things I'm going to talk a little bit about today is I'm going to share some of the experiences that I went through in reducing that turnover from 80% down to below 30% in a year. We're also going to talk about some of the things our company does, is also as far as attraction and retention. I want to share some industry information with you, and then some best practices. My hope for today's session is this will either validate some of the things you currently do, or just maybe there's a nugget or two you can take out of this that can help you retain your healthcare providers. So the presentation is geared around physicians, but of course this information and these practices can be used for anything from nurse practitioners to your existing staff. Like I said, we use this in our company. Our company is about 500 people in our division. Our total company is about 1,500. And a lot of the practices I'm going to share with you today are some of the things we do as an organization. So I'm from Salt Lake City. It's just a lot like Denver, maybe just bigger mountains and not as strong of drinks. But it was an easy flight here and an easy flight back, but I do love coming to Denver, but that's where I'm from. I spent a lot of time here in our corporate office in Salt Lake City. I also have an opportunity to visit our Connecticut office in Norwalk, Connecticut, and then we have an office down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So before we begin talking about how we retain our providers, I think it's important to figure out and discuss a little bit about what we're up against. So we partnered with a company called Fierce Healthcare, and we conducted a survey, and we asked folks, how long does a typical physician stay at one organization? And the good news on this slide, as you can see, is that 70% of the time, we're getting our healthcare providers to stay over 5 years. But the bad news of the slide is 30% of the time, they're leaving in the first 4. So when you ask yourself, why are they leaving? And this was, again, part of the survey we did with Fierce Healthcare, and respondents could actually pick more than one. Not a big surprise, right? Pay and location, top the list is number 1 and number 2 as reasons why physicians in this particular survey leave a practice, but there's also more prestige or better shifts. Maybe that work-life balance that we've all heard so much about. This hasn't changed since I worked a desk as a recruiter 15 years ago, right? I think you're seeing a little bit more of an increase in better shifts and more prestige, but pay and location have always been the number 1 and the number 2 reasons physicians look for new opportunities. But one of the things I'm going to talk about is the 5 keys to retain your providers, and they're pretty straightforward and they're pretty simple. Hiring for cultural fit, involving the right people in the process, sticking to the basics when it comes to onboarding, improving engagement, and appreciating your people. Because one of the things we found when you have this, right, when you can engage your people, when you're hiring for the right fit for your company, those other things, these right here, pay and location, they become less. But if I as an employee don't feel appreciated, I don't feel like you recognize me, I don't feel like I'm part of the decision-making process, I'm going to be tempted perhaps to take a look at an opportunity that may pay a few more dollars. If I don't feel part of your vision, I may look at an opportunity that's maybe a little bit of a better location. But if you keep me engaged and make me part of your process, and you have a strong onboarding and development program, you're going to find that you're going to retain those providers that can provide you more experience or more success for your facility. Again, back to my experience when I was involved in that acquisition, we weren't providing a good service to our customers, right? Because our business is such a relationship-based business. When you're turning your people over faster than you can bring them in, you're not providing that service to your customer. Because your customers want to see the same person. They want to talk to the same person. They want to put their recruitment efforts in the hands of somebody that knows them. And when I was working at desk and even recently to training people, we talk a lot about make sure that you understand what your facility is looking for clinically, right? Because we want to make sure whether it's locums or whether it's perm, that we find the right clinical match for you. But more often than not, we're talking to our clients and consulting with them about what they're looking for culturally. Because we know clinical can fill the gap today, but cultural fit is what's going to fill the gap tomorrow. It's going to give them that retention, that consistency in their medical staff. So this is a picture. So I'm going to show a few pictures at the end. I'm going to ask you what these pictures mean. So remember this picture. So this is a picture of a couple of employees at Comp Health. And several years ago, we really put a big emphasis on hiring for culture. We felt that that was a way to create a competitive advantage in our industry. And it's had a huge lift to our organization. Not only has hiring for cultural fit helped us attract and retain people, but we've also seen those people that are now connected to what we do as an organization. They're connected to our purpose, to our mission, to our belief. Right? We have a set of core values that guide us as an organization. And we want to make sure when we hire people that they fit with our culture. So how do you go about doing it? The key, I think, is identifying yourself as an organization. Right? So when we identified ourselves as an organization, we identified a set of core values, and we went out and started asking questions that demonstrated those core values. One of them is integrity and ethics, is one of our core values as an organization. So we had to come up with questions that ask the individual when they've displayed integrity and ethics. And it may have said something like this: take me through a time when your boss gave you some feedback or gave you direction on to do something and you disagreed with his or her direction. How did you handle that? Based on that question, we'll determine whether they're a good cultural fit. In fact, we get a number of candidates every year. Part of the journey we went on with this cultural, what we call a cultural BHAG, we actually ended up achieving Fortune 100's top places to work. We've been on that list 5 years in a row. And in 2013, we were actually number 3 behind Google and SAS Staffing. That's pretty cool validation of this stuff at work, right? Because people want to be part of your organization if you're making sure that you know who you are as an organization and you're asking the right questions. And one of the ways to determine who you are as an organization is a pretty simple step. It's a step that I used to tell my clients when I would consult with them facilities on their recruiting efforts. Find out who's been successful. I remember working with a client in Western Florida, and I started asking them the standard questions about what they're looking for clinically. I also started asking them questions about their culture. I asked them questions like, well, tell me about your medical staff. Where are they from? I found out that a lot of the doctors that worked in this clinic were from the Midwest. I said, interesting. Tell me a little bit about the culture of the organization. Tell me about the values. Tell me a little bit about their beliefs. And in doing so, we found that we could identify not only what they're looking for clinically, but what was going to be a long-term fit for their practice. Because I could have found a physician that was a good clinical match, but may not have stayed long-term in their practice. So again, looking back at who's been successful and then looking at who you've lost. If you look at your turnover, one of the things we do is every month our executive team gets together, and we have 1,500 people in our company, 500 in our current division. We get our executive team together. We look at every separation. We look at their resume. We look at their manager's review. We look at their training log. We want to find out what's been successful and what hasn't, so we can constantly refine our process. So you may be wondering what horses have to do with involving the decision makers, but let's talk a little bit about that. I was recruiting for an anesthesia practice in Morganton, North Carolina. and became pretty close with the practice. And they invited me out to come see their facility, see their community, so I could assist them in future recruiting needs. And they happened to identify a physician who was a good clinical match. She also was a good cultural fit. So my client actually invited me out to come and be part of the interview process with her and this physician and her family. So we went out to Morganton, North Carolina, and I got to know the physician, and I got to know the family. She had a husband who was a stay-at-home dad, and she had an 11-year-old daughter. Now, the 11-year-old daughter loved horses. And one of the things that the mom, the physician, said to her 11-year-old daughter was, hey, if we move to North Carolina, there may be an opportunity for you to have a horse. Okay, so what we did is I worked with the facility, and we set up a time when the physician was interviewing, a clinical interview, and seeing the OR. We took the daughter to the local stable. We got her to see the horse, visualize herself having a horse at that stable. We also found an 11-year-old girl who was a daughter of one of the people on the medical staff that had a horse at that stable. And we had her meet us there so that we could take this physician's daughter, who's a decision maker. She's 11, but she's a decision maker. They could ride horses. She made a great friend. They kept in touch. That was key to that successful recruitment. And I think that's been key to that physician, and this is 11 years ago. She's still at that practice today. But we didn't forget about the husband. The husband, like I said, stay-at-home dad. Loved to cook. So when we went on real estate tours, I met with the agent ahead of time, and I said, look, this guy loves to cook. He wants a big kitchen. He wants a place to entertain people. So we went and we made sure that every house that they showed this physician and her family had a great kitchen. I wanted him to visualize himself cooking and entertaining in that kitchen, right? Because an OR is an OR. Right? That anesthesiologist, when she's practicing, she's in the operating room, and to her, it can be in Ohio or it can be in Morganton, North Carolina. But that family, that daughter, they're in the community. They're the ones that need to live there every single day. So when it comes to decision makers, it's important to involve them and show them, not just tell them about the community. All right, I'm from Utah. Anybody know who this is? John Stockton. And Karl Malone, right? The all-time assist leader, number 2 on the scoring of MVP. What was that? They were getting beat by the Bulls.
Don't forget Steve Kerr.
And Steve Kerr, yeah. They made the NBA Finals in 97 and 99. And I only remember because it was June. And my sons were both born in June, one in 97 and one in 99. So I told my wife, I said, well, if we ever want to get the Jazz back to the NBA Finals, we better get pregnant and have another kid. She didn't really buy into that too much. But what are they doing in this picture?
Pick and roll.
Pick and roll, right. It's a fundamental, right? And they executed it perfectly. It's kind of like onboarding. It's just sticking to the basics. When you onboard somebody into your practice, it's nothing fancy. There's nothing new in the playbook. I'm going to take you through a few examples, but there's nothing fancy when it comes to onboarding. But it's just sticking to the fundamentals. John and Karl and the Jazz stuck to the fundamentals of this. People that played them knew they did the pick and roll. They even prepared for the pick and roll. But these guys executed it consistently, day in and day out. And onboarding is the exact same way. So in the survey we conducted, of course, we asked questions about what do you typically do? What's typically included in a physician's onboarding practice or process? Introductions, facility tours, welcome packet, weekly follow-ups. Pretty straightforward stuff, right? Kind of the basics, the fundamentals. But isn't it surprising? Look how often it's done. 43% of the time, introductions are done. 38% of the time, facility tours. Now, this is in the onboarding process. This is after they've started. 32% of the time, they'll send a welcome packet. Only 12% of the time, they're actually talking to them. This is not how you successfully onboard somebody into your practice. And now maybe the introductions are, well, Jeff, I introduced them when they came on the interview. So now that they started, I don't need to introduce them to everybody again. Well, don't you think that healthcare provider's been interviewing other places? Don't you think he or she's met other people? That they've seen your facility on the interview, but that could have been months ago. So take them out again. Introduce them to the right people. The onboarding process, and I kind of equate it to your first day at a new job. I mean, or high school, right? Any school. You're nervous. You don't know what to expect. So when somebody can take you around and reintroduce you to the people, the decision makers, they can show you the facility. There's a welcome packet, weekly follow-ups. I used to consult with the clients that I worked with, and I would tell them, hey, look, the more you can keep in touch with your physician through the recruiting process, and the more you can continue to keep in touch with them after they've started, the more successful they'll be. The longer they'll stay, the higher the retention, the more success you're going to have with that provider. But stop doing one of those fundamentals, right? If Karl Malone doesn't set that pick the same way every time, it's not going to work. If you don't do the basics of onboarding, it's not going to work. So there's 3 phases of onboarding. What I call phase 1, which is, look, they said yes. They signed my contract. Now there's a big old gap between when they sign the contract and when they start. And I can tell you as a recruiter, I have had more physicians not start, right? They signed the contract, they accepted, but they didn't start. I think you're going to see that even more. And why do I think you're going to see that even more? I think there's some generational issues out there, right? Where perhaps when I was growing up, your word meant something. I said, I'm going to take your job, I'm taking your job, right? I signed my name, it's over. Today, I think more and more healthcare providers are signing. You know, it's a nice safety net. I have something here, but man, I still might entertain other opportunities. You know, we train our folks to always prepare their doctors and their providers for the counteroffer, right? Just because the doctor says yes doesn't mean that physician's not going to get a counteroffer from his current employer. So we actually walk them through that process of how to prepare for the counteroffer and how to address it when their boss comes back and says, hey, I really want you to stay. What's it going to take to get you to stay here, right? So just because you signed them, just because they said yes, just because they started, or signed the contract, doesn't mean your recruitment's over. Taking care of all the paperwork. Accepting a new position is extremely stressful. It's very emotional, especially if you're dealing with people that are relocating, right? So folks that are relocating, there's emotion involved. I'm going to be leaving Salt Lake City, where I grew up, where I've skied, where my kids go to school, where my family lives, and I'm going to be relocating to Morganton, North Carolina, right? There's a lot of stress and anxiety that goes into relocation and goes into moving. So the more you can take care of them with the paperwork is going to be beneficial for them. Because you can imagine if they get a 4-inch stack of paperwork they need to fill out, it could weigh on their decision to perhaps stay and not take your job. Another opportunity is to provide logistical assistance for a smooth transition. The housing crisis hit our business hard. 95% of the doctors we place in permanent positions relocate. We're a national recruitment firm. And we had this housing crisis. Now, we could have done one of 2 things. We could have just said, well, and kind of victims, right, where it's kind of is what it is. But we said we can't do that because there was clients that were depending upon us to help them find a physician, and physicians that were depending upon us to help them find their new position, and patients that were the benefactors of that relationship, that match. So one of the things we did is we worked with a relocation company to assist the doctors in renting their homes. They couldn't sell them. So they couldn't sell their existing homes, so we got them connected with a rental company. Rent your existing home, and then rent a home in the new community. And then when you sell your existing, you can then buy something in the new. It was a way to get them to fulfill their obligation to start. So you need to be creative when it comes to logistical assistance for relocation. But anything you can do, again, is another thing that really helps them have a successful onboarding transition. Because at the end of the day, the last 2 bullet points really speak to what we're about, right? When you hire somebody, you want to make sure that you let them know they've made the right decision to join your practice, that they've part of a team that's excited to have them be part of their medical community. The second phase is really that first 90 days. This is, I liken again to, the first day in high school, right? If anybody can remember back that far, it was a little while for me. They don't know. They're excited, but they don't know what to do, right? So this is where a lot of direction is important. So when you have somebody come onto your staff, whether it's a physician, a PA, or whether it's somebody in the office, make sure you're giving them direction. You're setting clear expectations of what you expect out of them, that you're making sure they understand the policies and procedures, that you facilitate opportunities for networking, and that you make sure they get integration into the practice. Because again, just because they started doesn't mean we stop recruiting them. And then finally, 90 days and beyond. This is where I think it's important that we give them feedback, right? This is where, hey, I've been here 90 days. I'm kind of feeling like I know what I'm doing. I know where everything is. I've seen patients. I'm feeling good about it. I feel like I've made the right decision. But this is where you give them feedback on how they're doing. This is where you ask them for feedback on how you've done. One of the things we do is we actually meet with our folks after they've been here 90 days and say, how did it go? Tell us what went really well. Tell us where we can improve. Because we want to continually get better at this because we know the cost of retaining people is very high, or the benefit, rather, of retaining people is very high. So again, kind of the fundamentals, and here's a couple other ideas. Welcome sessions, development planning, mentor program if you have that opportunity, and even peer-to-peer support groups are very valuable when it comes to successful onboarding. All right, so I'm not a Star Wars guy, but I had a Yoda moment with my now 17-year-old son, Gabe. In fact, he calls me Yoda, and I think the older I get, maybe I'm starting to turn into a little bit of Yoda. I don't think my ears are quite that pointy. So I talked to my son, again, teenage boy, and I said to him, hey, your mom and I really need to have you keep your room clean, right? Anybody have that challenge with a teenager, right? So and he just kind of looked at me as teenagers do, kind of flippantly, yeah, okay, Dad, I'll try. And I said, okay, you'll try. And I said, hey, Gabe, and I had a pen in my hand, and I tossed the pen on the ground. And I said, hey, buddy, could you do me a favor? Could you try to pick up that pen? And he looks at me like, what's Dad been drinking again? And he bends over and he picks up the pen and kind of rolls his eyes and hands it back and kind of goes back to what he's doing. And I said, okay. And I took the pen. I said, nope. I threw it on the floor again. I said, hey, could you try to pick up that pen? And he bends down to pick up the pen. Again, eyes are rolling in the back of his head. And I say, stop. He goes, what? And I go, try to pick it up. Just try. And he says, Dad, I either pick up the pen or I don't. And I says, yeah, how about that room, right? I mean, engagement's the same thing. There's no try in engagement. You either engage your people or you don't, which is the Yoda moment. There's no try. You either do or do not do, I think, is how it works. So there's my Yoda moment. Why is engagement such a big deal? Well, Gallup survey came back and they said, well, let me tell you why engagement is such a big deal. 18% of workforces, and this is about engaged work groups, they're 18% more productive when they're engaged. They're 16% more profitable. They're 37% less prone to absenteeism, 12% better at engaging their customers. Now, I happen to disagree with that one. I think that's much, much higher. And I'll tell you why. I had looked for a new doctor. So I got a referral from a friend. And I went to this physician, and I went in the office, and I sat down, and the doctor comes in and sees me, introduces himself, asks me a couple questions. Doesn't seem like he's engaged. And in the process, what he didn't do is he didn't engage me. We didn't have any dialogue. He talked a little bit about my symptoms, asked me a few questions, made his diagnosis, and then left. Didn't engage me at all. And I walked out of that room thinking, well, I really don't like this guy. I'm going to go find somebody else. So again, I would argue that it's much higher than 12%. But another opportunity I think is important in this business is reducing quality defects by 60%. When they're engaged in the process, they care. Quite frankly, they give a damn, right? You know, and we went through the process to get to Fortune's top 100 places to work. And now we as an executive team could have went into a conference room and we could have pulled out a grease board and we could have written down a bunch of ideas that we thought would help us get on that list. But it wasn't just about the list. The list was a nice validation of what we achieved. It was about the journey. We knew that the journey to get on the list was going to be far more important in transforming to our culture and our company than the validation of just making the list. But we didn't want to do it in a bubble. We wanted to engage our people, to make them play a part in this. Because at the end of the day, it can't be just my culture. It can't be our CEO, Mike Weinholz's, his culture. Because at some point, I'm going to retire. Mike's going to retire. And it needs to have legs and be their culture. So now we have 1,500 people that are engaged in our vision, engaged in our mission, and now it's their culture. Which is why in our business we have I think we're at 21% turnover rate. And in a staffing organization, in a sales division, that's extremely low. Remember the company that we acquired? Upwards of 80%. In fact, they had an office that was over 100. I had a tough time doing that math. How they could be over 100%. I mean, they were firing them quicker than they were hiring them. But 51% less likely to leave. So DecisionWise is a company that we do a lot of work with, and they came back to us and they said, well, the cost of disengagement costs an organization about 1/3 of what you pay. So for every $10,000 you pay somebody in their salary or their income, 1/3 of that is lost if they're disengaged. They go on, DecisionWise goes on, to say that disengaged employees cost the American economy up to $350 billion a year. That's a lot of money. And I have a hard time, and I connect this to, and what about the people that they're not engaging in the process? What about the patients that aren't being engaged because one of my employees is not engaged? What about the community that doesn't have an OBGYN and is looking to us to either staff it temporary or permanent, and one of my people aren't engaged, and so they're not really working too hard. Now there's patients in that community, expecting mothers and fathers that might have to travel or will have to travel outside that community for their prenatal care. That's concerning to me much more so than just the dollar amount. But DecisionWise was able to quantify it for us and say this is the impact of disengagement. Simple little graph here, what employee engagement looks like in a healthcare delivery model. The more your people are engaged, the better patient care they provide, the better the outcomes, better ability to attract quality talent, higher retention. Pretty straightforward stuff. Satisfiers and motivators. Have you guys heard about the difference between the two? You guys familiar with the satisfiers and motivators? Satisfiers are just, they're the basics. They're kind of what everybody expects. Look, I expect to be paid. I expect to have supervision, security, and administration, right? But it's the motivators. It's this group here on the left that really speaks to engagement. Because remember at the beginning when we were talking about the reasons physicians leave a practice, money, location, prestige, and work-life balance, right? Better shifts. But if I feel a sense of achievement, I feel like what I'm doing is making a difference, I'm less likely to leave. If I feel like I'm properly recognized, I'm less likely to leave, right? Same with advancement, as well as relationship and supervision with your peers. So it's pretty simple. If you want to motivate your people, my advice is just make a plan. Make a plan. And it starts with really honest feedback and dialogue. We coach all the leaders that we hire in our organization on the importance of vulnerability. That, to really make a connection. If I really want to find out what motivates you, I have to be honest and open with you. I have to be vulnerable. I have to put myself out there and really get to know them and what makes them tick, right? That honest dialogue is what's going to be beneficial for my growth. Is their leader. It's going to be also beneficial for their growth and making sure that they continue to stay motivated. This is that health and wellness reports. Do surveys. Meet with your people. Every executive in our company, we do 120-day interviews with people. So after they've been here 120 days, 6 months on the job, again, as I mentioned before, we meet with them. We create an environment where we say, hey, how's it going? How are we doing? How'd your first few days go? How was the training? What's your relationship like with your leader? How's the mentor program doing? We want to get that feedback and find out how satisfied they are, kind of their health and wellness. And I think it's often overlooked, and it's even overlooked in our company. Well, but I meet with you all the time, and we're constantly getting together, and I have one-on-ones with you every month. Do I really need to do something formal like a anniversary check-in? Yeah, you do. People like that formal feedback. They want you to sit down with them and go through their goals, how they're developing, how they're coming along. And this is really an opportunity to follow up on any sort of goals you made with the provider at the recruitment process, right? Is to sit down and say, okay, so this is one of the things you said you really wanted to do. Let's talk about how we're doing there. Like a lot of the doctors that I was involved in the recruiting process, they said, look, this is something I really want to do. This hospital doesn't have it today, but maybe they, can they develop it? And the hospital said, oh, sure, we can add that at some point. Well, sitting down with that provider and talking about that, again, is one of the keys to keeping him or her on your medical staff. All right, don't really know why they stuck this in there, but it comes down to appreciating your people. There you go, right? He's happy, right? Somebody just appreciated him, so there you go. Thank you for that connection. I struggled with that for like 5 days. It's the happy dance. So, when I started, first of all, when I was growing up, we didn't get a trophy just to show up. But exactly, right? I got a trophy when I won. That trophy signified something. It was an accomplishment. And man, I put that on my mother's mantle and I displayed it with pride right up there next to my picture. And and it meant something to me. It was a validation of my success and my accomplishment. So when I got into leadership, so what did I do? I'm like, trophies. We need trophies. So I worked with our marketing department and we designed crystal awards, and some were plexiglass and on these little crystal balls on stands. And when somebody had some success, whether it was individual or whether it was group, whether it was a milestone or whether they just provided exceptional service to somebody that they were working with or somebody they were working for, we would have a presentation, a formal presentation acknowledging them in front of their peers. And I would see them displayed on their desk, okay? And I felt like my job was done. I was recognizing my people. But what I found is when somebody left the organization and I walked past their desk, what was still on their desk? Their trophies. Some of these people that we were hiring, they got a trophy all the time. They didn't even have to win. Hell, they didn't even have to play. And they got a trophy. They got a trophy for showing up, right? And so here I was thinking trophies. Awards were the way to recognize my people. And to some of them it was. To some of them, even today, still display. By the way, if you're ever in Salt Lake and you want to come to my office, I'll show you my trophies. They're in my office, still there. I dust them off and a little tear runs down my cheek. But I think the key when it comes to recognition is that it needs to be individualized. Some people like the trophy. Some people like a simple thank you. When I was first a leader, I sent an email thanking one of our folks for something they did. And years went by, and I was actually in our Florida office, and I walked past her desk, and I noticed there's that email from like 4 years earlier, tacked on her board. And I was like, really? It was an email from me? It's not that important, right? But to her, it was everything. And I even commented, I says, wow, you still have that email. And she says, yeah, it really helps me when I'm having a bad day to look at that email and know that I was doing the right thing and that you believed in me. And so never underestimate the power of appreciation. Some like public, some like private. A lot of the young folks that we hire, hey, they want time off and money, right? They don't care about a pen with a little emblem on it. They certainly don't care about the trophies. They want a day off to go spend with their family. So we do that. So we give them recognition, and we still do the recognition formally, right? We're still there making a presentation. It's very heartfelt and genuine, but how you recognize your people is something to keep in mind, that it needs to be genuine, clearly, and authentic, but it also needs to be unique. And here's an opportunity I think really exists in our space, right? Is in healthcare, I think there's a real opportunity with recognition to give your healthcare providers a greater voice. Because you think about that for a minute. It's a way to acknowledge them and thank them for the job they've done. It's also an opportunity to engage them and grow and develop them. So maybe there's an opportunity to sit on a steering committee. Maybe there's an opportunity for mentorship, or maybe some informal leadership. But this is an often overlooked form of recognition that I think is a powerful one in and of itself. Yeah, and the last part is don't forget to dance, right? So in our company, we have over 400 employee events a year. We have a dedicated staff of 4 people. That's all they do. They're our party planners. We take what we do very serious, but we don't always take who we are very serious. We have fun. We dance. And I think more important when it comes to celebration and having fun, it's less about the barbecues or the silly hat days. It's more about an opportunity to bring people together, especially people that may not have an opportunity to interact every day, right? So you can show your appreciation by buying lunch and bringing them together. You'll be amazed. Just walk through the room. You'll be amazed that one of your new people will start asking questions if it's a tenured person. And there's opportunity for informal mentorship. It's a place for them to convene and collaborate. And then, of course, don't forget to dance. So we're going to go through a little quiz. Who remembers the picture of these two, what this was representative of? Cultural fit, right. Remember, hiring for cultural fit. Identify what your culture is. Look at the past, who's worked out, who hasn't. Create questions around that culture. Our interview process, we have about 40 questions, all on culture. We bring people into a hiring event, we take you, and you come into a room with me, and I ask you an hour's worth of questions around culture. If you don't pass that interview, it doesn't matter if you've been a recruiter for 15 years and you've had more success than anybody that works for me. You're not hired. You have to be a good cultural fit in an organization because we know we don't want to turn you over. You could come in and be the world's greatest recruiter and you could have success, but then you may leave, right? If you're not a good cultural fit, if you don't believe in our vision, our values, and our mission, then you're not a good cultural fit for us. So we hire first and foremost for culture. All right, the horses. Decision makers, that's right? Remember the 11-year-old girl. And I'm sure you guys have all recruited people into your practices that, they come to you and they say, I got to leave. You say, why? And they say, well, my daughter's not happy. Maybe, just maybe, if you showed her the stables, right? If you found out what she was interested in, she may still be there. And it's important that you involve everybody in the process. We advise our recruiters, don't just interview the doctor. Find out who in their family is also part of this decision-making process. Interview every single one of them. It shows, number one, that you care because you're engaging them in the process and you're hearing their voice. Because oftentimes your providers will say, oh, no, my boys are fine. My boys are fine. They'll be fine. Wherever we go, they're good, right? I remember asking doctors that when I'd say, I'd like to talk to your kids or I'd like to talk to your spouse or significant other. No, they're fine. They're going to go wherever I tell them to. Yeah, okay, just the same. I'd really love to spend a few minutes with them because I knew that was never the case, right? I can tell you right now in my life, it's not me making the decisions. It's my wife and my two boys. Because again, I could go live anywhere. And I had offices in Florida and Connecticut. My wife tells me I went to Florida a lot more in the wintertime than I did in the summertime. But that's just when they needed me more. But to this day, I could relocate and live in any one of those places. I know the people. I love the people. I know the communities. I love the office. The job is the job is the job. But my wife and my kids have to live in the community, so they need to be involved in the decision-making process. Right? Okay, what was Carl and John doing? Basics. Basics of what? Onboarding. That's right. That it's not fancy. It just requires discipline. And if you onboard your people correctly, promise you they'll stay more often than they'll leave. That's if you're hiring them for a good cultural fit, if you're involving the right people in the process. But onboarding is something that's often overlooked. We think, well, they signed. I got them. They signed the contract. Well, I can tell you that they're being recruited every single day. And as I mentioned, today's healthcare providers, I think, are their signature is not as meaningful as it might have been to my generation. Okay, Yoda, little green man. Remember what this is? Engagement. Yeah, there's no what in engagement. There's no try. There's just do. You engage your people or you don't. There's no try. Engaged people have such an impact on your business. These things have been really a competitive advantage for our organization over the course of the last several years, and they've had a huge impact in our ability to better service our customers. And we believe and we know that when we provide good service to our customers, that service is impacting patients' lives. And that's how we make that connection. But they have to be engaged in that process. Then, of course, he's dancing. Remember what this is? Appreciation. Thank you. Yeah, let's get off that picture real quick. But it's about appreciation and recognition. And remember, one size doesn't fit all when it comes to appreciation, but have fun, appreciate your people, give them opportunities to grow and develop. And again, these things are simple. And like I said at the beginning, there's nothing here that I believe was earth-shattering, probably nothing here that is stuff you guys aren't doing, but maybe there's some good reminders of why you need to continue to do it. Perhaps some validation of why it's important to do it. Because in this delivery system, in this healthcare delivery model we're in today, retention is going to be critical. We all know the shortage of healthcare providers we're facing. We know that number is going to get bigger. So if we're better at retaining our providers, we're going to be further ahead of the game. We're going to provide better experience to our patients. Our providers. They're going to provide a better experience to your patients, and it's going to help us continue to generate revenue and continue to invest and grow. So again, my name is Jeff Freeman. I thank the association for inviting me here today. I thank you guys for attending. I'm a pretty fast talker, so we've got a few minutes left. Anybody have any questions that I can answer? Okay. Yes?
In regards to engaging employees, is it easier to engage a new employee or form one that you haven't seen that out? Is it the responsibility of the employer or the leader or the person who's doing the job?
I would say it's both. The engagement isn't, it's not my responsibility to engage you. It's my responsibility to inspire you and keep you engaged, but you have to play an active role in that. And to answer your question, I think it's a lot harder to re-engage somebody that's disengaged than to engage somebody that's new. Because remember, when they're new, they're just enthusiastic. I call them the enthusiastic beginners. They don't know what they don't know, but damn it, they're excited about it, right? But when they've been here a long time, they kind of get a little disillusioned, especially if you've done something to stop engaging them. So I would say, don't ever stop engaging them because it's really difficult to re-engage. And we just have quite frank conversations. It goes back to that vulnerability discussion. We're just really honest with our people. They could be our top performer. They could be there 20 years. But if they're disengaged, we sit them down, we have a talk with them. Honest, candid feedback. And let them know that we really need to get them part. And we ask them, what role can I play in helping you kind of re-engage in this business? Is there outside sources that we can incorporate? Is there things I need to do, stop doing, continue to do? Because oftentimes it takes that honest dialogue to determine just what you need to do to correct it. But yeah, disengagement is tough to correct. Yeah.
You talked about your onboarding packet. What do you like to include in a recruitment packet that's more about your reality? So we get a lot of people that are yes, and then they're onboarding and they're like, this isn't what I was expecting.
Yeah.
Recruitment sells them a story, which
Yeah.
they get the sale, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You're kind of stuck a little bit. So how much of that honesty and how do you approach putting that into like a recruitment packet?
I'm in the camp that, look, I'm going to open the kimono and show you everything, right? Because I think at the end of the day, you're going to see it when you get there. And so if there's some false pretense or some recruiting that goes on, it doesn't do anybody any good. So I would encourage you to be as honest as you can. If there's a problem and there's a wart in your company, show it to them. I think that's going to help them understand your culture, that in our company we have transparency. We have honesty and integrity. I want to let you know this is what's going on, and this is a problem area. And this is an area we're hoping that you can come in and help us fix. Right? So I would encourage you to be as honest and candid as you can in that packet of information. I've even consulted with facilities to say, open the books, show them. If you're asking yourself, should I show them this? Really pause and ask yourself, well, why? Why am I guessing whether I should show them this or not? Am I trying to hide something? We've worked with a lot of facilities and a lot of doctors, and we're just really candid and open with our customers, saying, hey, look, we got to tell you a little bit about this person. This is something they're working on. We want to be really honest. And oh, by the way, doctor, before you accept this position, we need to be really candid with you. This is what's going on there. They've had a significant amount of turnover. They've had 80% turnover.
So does it kind of mimic your onboarding? Like
Yeah.
all the information you need to get twice? How we schedule,
Yeah.
how we handle on-call, the things that physicians don't want to hear about.
Yes.
Covering holidays.
Correct. But they shouldn't be hearing that for the first time in the onboarding packet. Correct. Yep. And I would also say in the recruiting packets, when you're recruiting people, anything you can send them that connects them to the community is important. Especially if you're relocating somebody. If there's a newspaper you can send them. If the daughter wants to board horses, send them something from the horse, from the boarding school. If they're into college football, send them a shirt or something from the college football team. Again, we want that connection to the community. Any other questions? All right. Well, I want to thank you for your time. Hopefully this was valuable.